Hello there and welcome to a new day. This is AM Prime on WESN Content Capital. I'm Keaton Shaw and welcome to the program. Pleased to have you with us this morning. Now, as we speak about finance and the economy, we're focusing on credit unions in particular this morning. Did you know that Trinidad and Tobago has 700,000 members within various credit unions across the nation? Did you know that credit unions hold up to $19 billion in assets? Well, of course, these institutions are very much important to society and they play a significant role. Although some may argue that role is restricted based off of laws in place here in TNT. But we'll get into that conversation a bit later on. This morning we're speaking about the credit unions and their fight against criminal activity here in Trinidad and Tobago. And later on we'll also speak about what they expect, or what they hope for rather, in the upcoming budget to be read on October 2nd. Well, this morning I'm joined by President of the Cooperative Union League, Credit Union League here in TNT, Mr. Joseph Remy. He's with us via Zoom. Hello, sir, and welcome to the program.
Hi, good morning to you, and it's a pleasure once again to join in this important conversation. We appreciate the opportunity to expand on some of our views relative to how we deal with current issues in Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, sir, thank you very much. You made comments that given the ever-evolving criminal element, especially with the advancement of technologies and their adaptation and use of such technologies and the activities that they may carry out, credit unions have their part to play, their role to play in protecting their union members. Now, those could simply be interpreted based off of the ever-evolving criminal situation here in TNT, especially with financial crimes now being one of points that are very much noted every year. But precisely the comments that you made, where did they arise from? Is it based off of experiences taking place within the unions itself, or rather just a moment or a measure of proactiveness?
It was very proactive because of the fact that we have a very robust anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism shared services program, which we continue to develop. And those comments were made at one of our annual compliance officers conference. So what we were doing, what we do every year, is we bring our compliance officers together in a conference format and expose them to all the latest developments in compliance officers' programs, and how we deal with all the nuances of anti-money laundering, of counter-financing, terrorism. And what we want to do is to always be ahead of the eight ball. So we don't want our credit unions to find themselves in a situation where we are coming from behind. So we, as a league, take in front, and we have developed our compliance officers. We have a very strong relationship with the FIUTT, where we share we have developed a compliance program, we shared it with them, and they found that it was very much in line with the work that they were doing. And they were part of the compliance officers program on that day. And we also had the officers from the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. And then we had other experts who brought to bear to the table all the modern developments that are taking place in the issue of anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism, so that our compliance officers will always be on top of their game, and that the credit union movement would never be one of those vehicles that would be used by the illegal persons to profit from AML and CFT activities. So we were very proactive in our approach to ensure that our compliance officers are very much in tune with what is happening, and they have all the necessary competencies and capacities and capabilities to deal with issues that arise in the movement.
Well, one can certainly be assured based on everything that you've suggested in your response. However, that is in regard to compliance officers. Compliance across the board for members of the actual league, and these are very strong anti-laundering measures that you said exist. Is compliance amongst your members something that is really strong and steady?
Definitely, and you see, the credit union structure is such that one of our foundation principles is training, development, and information. And we believe in those corporate principles. So every credit union has an obligation and not just an obligation by word. There is a provision in the Act that says that every credit union, at the end of the year, when surplus arises, they have to place a certain amount, 5% in most instances of the surplus must go towards an education fund. And that education fund was set up to ensure that there will be an ongoing resource pool that will allow credit unions to educate their members of all the developments that are taking place within the industry. So there is an ongoing educational trust among credit union members about the issue of AML and CFT, while the turnover officers, the board of credit unions, and the education committee has an obligation and a responsibility to expand those training and developmental opportunities to the wider membership base.
And what about credit unions in TNT and their ability to also adapt and advance with the times? We're speaking about purely technology now.
Very much so, and we have been focused a lot on ensuring that there is an exposure to all the modern technological advancements. So the issue of digitization and digitalization, our credit unions are way ahead of the game in those areas. We have developed certain programs and we have seen credit unions employ certain systems, issues of cybersecurity and all the other things which we know are issues that would affect other institutions. Credit unions have taken that on board. And the issue of risk management is critical in the credit union movement. So it's just that we don't talk too much in the public about our successes, which we believe we would have to start to do now. And that is what we would want to share with our membership. We share the information among our members. We need to share it to the wider public that credit unions are one of the most stable socio-economic vehicles for people's economic independence because of the fact that we belong to an international structure and an international movement. And we take feed from what happens internationally. We belong to the Caribbean Confederation of Credit Unions. We belong to the World Council. And they sit at the table with the international regulators and ensure that the movement adapts to all the modern standards and regulations that affect the way our financial institutions operate, and it filters down to the individual credit unions. So we need to tout our success stories much more because we believe that we have done a tremendous job in having the level of stability within the credit union movement.
Well, Mr. Remy, let's actually focus on that point for a moment there, the credibility and I suppose the success of credit unions here and their contribution, say, socio-economic-wise. Given what you have just said, why, if that be the case, are credit unions, it still seems that they are ignored because they are very much still dependent on financial institutions, other financial institutions, for their operations. Why is that the case?
And it's something that we have been lobbying and advocating for quite a while, and we will continue to advocate and lobby. Because one of the first things I said very early in my tenure is that credit unions should have a seat at the table of policy making in Trinidad and Tobago because of the tremendous social impact and the social stability stock we bring to the table. And as such, we will continue to implore upon the authorities of the values and virtues of the cooperative business model. You see, there is a strong focus on the corporate entities and the banks and the other financial institutions are given all the leeway in terms of their preferences. But the institution that has brought stability to the table is not given that preference. And it's something that we would want to ensure that we put some measures in place to have that corrected. And you're right, which is not given the level of prominence because we don't say there is no requirement law for credit unions to have members attached to certain boards of social institutions where they can bring to bear the values that they have brought to communities in terms of social stability and the expertise that we have in terms of microfinancing for small persons in the communities and lending to small businesses and those things. And I think that is something that we will continue to make noise about because we believe it is imperative and important for credit unions to have that seat at the table of policy making in Trinidad and Tobago and be given the recognition for the values that we have brought to the society and the stability, the social stability that we have brought to Trinidad and Tobago. In times of COVID and everything, credit unions were the source of resource that persons had to come to. When we had the financial crisis some years ago, the credit unions stood strong, stable, and were able to weather the storm and provide that umbrella and that buffer for persons of modest means. And it appears that because of the kind of market-driven society that we have, the cooperative business model and what it brings to the table needs to be given much more prominence so that people could evolve and communities could evolve and live their social and economic well-being.
Mr. Remy, are credit unions permitted to cash, for example, social services checks, government checks at the institutions?
We are not at this time, and those are some simple things that we are talking about. And let me just put some context. We had an engagement with the government, and they committed to have an enhanced role for credit unions in national development. And one of the things that they put on the table as a low-hanging fruit, this was since Mr. Robert Lehan was Minister of Public Utilities, was the ability for credit unions to encash government checks and the ability of credit unions to be recipients of the salaries of public officers. Up to now, those things have not been in place because there are some simple legislative changes that needs to be made so that those things can come into being. We are part of an implementation committee that made that recommendation to the government. And we have not seen that come to reality as yet. And we are lobbying strongly, and I said it, this is one of the things I would like to see, and we would like to see from the cooperative credit union movement as a policy prescription in this year's budget presentation, that credit unions, the requisite amendment to the legislation be a priority, and that credit unions will now be allowed to encash government checks and be in a position to receive salaries on behalf of public officers who belong to credit unions.
So let's now move forward a bit, because you've just mentioned what it is you're pushing for and what you hope to see happening, well, as priority. And that being said, the budget is due to be read on October 2nd. What is it that the Union League, the Credit Union League, hopes to see coming from that budget in particular?
Okay, well, I made mention of the issue with the policy prescription for the encashment of government checks and the assignment of salaries. We would also like to see some form of support given to credit unions for the continued role that they can play with respect to small and micro enterprise development. And the Credit Union League has proposed that we sit as that incubator body that will work with small and micro enterprises and develop them. What is happening now is that our members will come to us for loans to start up their small business. And based on the restrictive legislative framework that we operate within, once these businesses develop and evolve, then they can no longer be members of the cooperative credit union movement, and they have to go elsewhere for funding, which we believe is a very discriminatory practice. And as such, we would like to see some proposal that will allow the expansion of small and micro enterprise lending through credit unions, and that the league is with that incubator source and provide that, because we would want to provide training and development for the small and micro enterprise businesses so that they will be able to run their business properly, effectively, and efficiently, bearing in mind all the risks attendant with running businesses in this particular environment. We would also like to see a focus on youth development, and we have been calling and clamoring over the years for the reintroduction of cooperative studies on the curriculum of primary and secondary schools. In that sense, what we will do is start from an embryo stage, imbuing in the young persons the whole cooperative business model ethos. And when they leave school, then they will be in a better position to be part of this noble movement that has supported them over the years. Because most of them would have been able to go to secondary schools and to primary schools and to universities funded by credit unions because of their parents' involvement. And we would want that whole business model to be expanded, and that to us will take youths away from a life of crime. And as such, we believe that is a critical element in moving this thing forward. And then we would like to see credit unions be given priority, as I said earlier on, to be part of all policy prescriptions that impact on the social, and economic well-being of citizens in Trinidad and Tobago. We play a critical role, and we should be given some level of recognition for that. There should be some funding provision provided, because we are not just talking that because we want to do it. We are guided by the United Nations Secretary General report that has advocated for credit unions to play and governments to recognize the more meaningful role that credit unions can play in the sustainable developmental goals. And as such, we believe that the government should look at that based on the fact that it is one of the most monitored current reports is the 2023 UN Secretary General report. And we would like to see they take some action on that report and place credit unions in a place where they can make that meaningful contribution. And then make it easy in terms of the regulatory framework for credit unions to have their own cooperative credit union bank. We would provide the funding and all the necessary resource capacity to run that bank. But the regulatory framework must be such that it will not be a difficult proposition for the credit union movement to have a cooperative bank. That where our $18 billion and more in assets and our financial resources can be placed in there and utilized to the benefit and well-being of the entire movement.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad that you expanded and mentioned that United Nations report. That report actually being published not too long ago, 2023, the year that we're in. Mr. Remy, you've also expanded on the relationship between the credit unions and SMEs in terms of economic development. And you've also expanded on the need for greater focus on educations within the primary and secondary institutions. Therefore, this morning, as part of the conversation, is that an admittance that Trinidad and Tobago does not fully understand, though there are 700,000 members, the benefits of credit unions to society?
Well, I would not want to say Trinidad and Tobago. I want to say successive governments have not placed priority. If you could recall, some years ago, many years ago, when the issue of cooperatives were placed on the table, we had a Ministry of Labour and Cooperative Development. And because of the shift away to corporate development instead of cooperative development, the ministry's responsibilities changed. So we moved from Ministry of Labour and Cooperative Development to Ministry of Labour and Small and Micro Enterprise Development. And now we are no longer under the Ministry of Labour. We are now placed under the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service. While we may see some semblance of alignment with the youth, the issue of the cooperative business model does not resonate properly under that ministry. We had raised that when ministerial portfolios were assigned. So the wider citizenry have accepted, because of the fact that we have over 700,000 members, they have accepted the values of and virtues of the cooperative business model. But we believe because of the nature of the business model and the fact that it is a democratically controlled institution where members are in control, the authorities would not want that to prosper because they believe it will bring about a different ideological construct in Trinidad and Tobago that will not resonate with the free market system. And I think we have to look in other places in other jurisdictions where the cooperative business model has been very successful in building social stability and building economic growth and development. And as such, I believe it's not the wider citizenry, it is the authorities who deliberately do not want to see credit unions flourish because of the ideological construct of the cooperative business model, where it provides ownership across the board, where it's a bottom-up democratic institution, and it's not a code where the leaders, there is a maximum leadership structure, but there is a member-controlled institution. And that to us is where the failure is, and those are the things we have been advocating for, and will continue to advocate that it be changed.
Mr. Remy, that's a most interesting position and point that you've made there. I mean, given the advocacy over, well, years and successive governments, as you've mentioned, what do you suppose is going to take now to change that mindset in terms of the acceptance of the ideology of how credit unions operate and actually function?
I'm an eternal optimist, and we in the movement are eternal optimists. We believe that if you if you look at how holes are made in concrete, one drop of water continually dropping on one spot will eventually have an impact. And we believe that our persistent and sustained advocacy will definitely resonate. And what we will continue to do is to educate our membership, expand the membership base, and then you eventually demonstrate to the wider the authorities the strength of the movement. We may have to take different actions that the cooperative movement have not taken in the past. And I'm saying all within the laws of Trinidad and Tobago to ensure at the end of the day that there is that recognition for the values and virtues of the cooperative business model and place credit unions in their rightful place in society so that they can make that, continue to make that meaningful contribution. And we believe if we sit at the policy decision tables, we will see a different outcome in some of our social outputs that we are seeing, what they are trying to do to bring social stability. We have a model that has been successful, and people must use it as a guide in terms of how we build this modern society. So we are optimistic that continued advocacy and lobbying will eventually reach where it rightfully is supposed to reach.
Mr. Remy, I want to thank you very much for joining me this morning on the program, sir, and I'm very pleased for this conversation. And I say I look forward to the next conversation following the reading of the budget on October 2nd. Thank you very much, sir, and do have a good day.
Thank you much. It was a pleasure.
Well, as Mr. Remy mentioned, 700,000 members. The importance of the role that credit unions play with SMEs here in Trinidad and Tobago, it can be understated. With 19 billion in assets, there should not be a reliance on other financial institutions, even where members cannot cash government checks. All those are things which need to be obviously looked at. And according to Mr. Remy, yes, they've been examined and the recommendations are there. It just seems the implementation, as is with a lot of things here in TNT, is lagging. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, let us take a break here on AM Prime. And when we return, does it matter what the gender of your surgeon is? Does it matter if your surgeon is male or female? Well, a new scientific study suggests yes, it does. We'll actually expand on that after this.
Let the home store turn your house into a home you love. Get everything you need to give your home that special look and feel. We offer household items, lawn and garden, paint center, hardware, plumbing, lighting and electrical, toys and storage solutions. 5 convenient locations: 6th Avenue Barataria, The Falls at Westmore, Pennywise Plaza Shoguanas, C3 Center Branch and C3 San Fernando. Check out our Facebook page for more information and come visit us today. The Home Store. Turn your house into a home you love.
Maybe he landed here totally by coincidence.
No problem.
But if by chance he's admiring your fresh coat of Benjamin Moore soft sky blue, well, that's a pretty high compliment. Coming from an expert.
From Maracas Bay to Arafita Avenue and Piaco, Richard's Bake and Shark brings the world's most popular fish sandwich closer to you. Open daily at all our locations.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website, fanzonett.com, to make your purchase today.
I am Rondell Donowa, attorney at law and host of Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Strictly Legal is a legal program geared towards informing you, the public, of your legal rights, responsibilities, and remedies. So be viewing Thursdays 10 a.m. to 10:30 a.m.
If a doctor recommends that you need to have surgery, what are some of the first things that come to your mind? Do I really need this operation? How much is it going to cost me? Will my insurance cover it? What are the effects of the recovery time? Well, those are some of the questions that are the very first to flood through your mind. But have you ever considered whether or not the sex of your surgeon could actually affect the outcome of your procedure? Well, a new scientific study suggests yes, it does matter. And to expand on that this morning, I welcome once more to AM Prime Dr. Vanessa Harry, and she's with us via Zoom. Good morning, Dr. Harry, and welcome back. Good to see you.
Good morning, and thanks very much for having me again on the program.
Well, Dr. Harry, reading a column that was written 2 weeks ago by yourself, immediately caught my attention with this particular study. As we get into the conversation, could you just brief us as to what the study was, maybe how it was conducted, and the, I suppose the results from it?
Yes, actually, these findings have been around for years now, but formally published just several weeks ago in well-respected journal called JAMA Surgery. That's the Journal of the American Medical Association. They published not one, but actually two separate studies that looked at the gender of your surgeon. Now, this journal is well recognized. They will do all their checks. All articles and submitted studies are peer-reviewed. They look at the methodology, they look at the statistics used, and only publish if they think that the findings are worthwhile and worthy of a good, robust study. So interestingly, two very large studies were independently done, one in Canada and one in Sweden. And they both found that if your surgeon was female, you actually did better, your outcome was better, you were less likely to have complications. And this study, these two studies actually did get a fair amount of international media. It was reported in lots of newspapers around the world, and hence, I brought it to the public's attention in my column, because again, I thought it was interesting. One of the reasons is that so few women are getting into surgical fields now. Mm-hmm. And, it's nice to encourage young doctors, even students, to think about a surgical field. Traditionally, it was and still is a very male-dominated field. And it's nice to think that the results are on par or even better with, male surgeons, and to again encourage females doctors to get into a surgical specialty, because it's something that they will very likely be good at and, have fairly good results. But the studies were pretty exceptional in their results, because these were statistically significant differences in patient outcome. So as I reported, last week or 2 weeks ago, in fact, you were more likely to have post-operative infections, readmission to a hospital, needing repeat surgery, and the complications were as far wide as just a minor infection to having a heart attack or a stroke, if the gender of your surgeon was male, and these persisted well until a year post-surgery. So fairly remarkable findings, and difficult sometimes to explain, but I've read both studies completely, and they were conducted on very large numbers. Both countries used their national databases. So in Canada, they looked at over 150,000 surgical cases, particularly gallbladder surgery. And in Sweden, again, over 100,000 cases were looked at from different types of surgery, from gynecological surgery, obstetric surgery, to general surgical procedures. All of these were looked at on the basis of the gender of the surgeon.
Dr. Harry, has there been any explanation as to why, I suppose, adverse post-operative effects, and we're speaking about, as you said, medical complications following a surgery, why there may be increased chances if your surgeon is male, and such chances are decreased statistically if your surgeon is female? Has there been any explanation as to why that may be the case?
Yes, so both studies have offered some discussion and have postulated some what they think might be responsible. But I have to qualify this and obviously say, studies that look at personal characteristics or even gender differences are sometimes very hard to interpret, very hard to define. And the last thing I want to do is for anyone to feel that, male surgeons are incompetent. My colleagues, some of my best friends are male surgeons. I'm married to a male surgeon. So it doesn't necessarily have to translate to competence or even technical ability. But some of the theories or some of the explanations used, and they actually did ask a fair amount of experts to comment on the findings of these studies, and their commentaries are actually also published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And some of the factors they thought were, they found good evidence to suggest that the female surgeons did have longer operating time. So they did take a bit longer. They were slower. They were less likely to convert, for instance, from a laparoscopic, which is a minimally invasive keyhole procedure, to open surgery. And some of the other factors that they found was that, and this has been shown in other studies, that in female surgeons or women, they have less of risk-taking behavior. They have a little bit of a more patient-centered approach. Their visits with the patients were longer, so it took their time a bit more. And another study even showed that females tended to respond more attentively to feedback from others, from seniors. I think speed did have a bit to do with these two studies. Some other theories that were suggested was that females do tend to collaborate a bit more. They are more open to discussion, suggestions. They took on board well-recognized international guidelines. I mean, the theory of the lonesome wolf or the lonesome cowboy of the male surgeon, has persisted over time. I don't necessarily think that is true all the time. But at the end of the day, this is a study, two studies done fairly robustly and showing, these differences, which difficult to interpret, but it does beg the question of should we be doing more in-depth analysis of outcomes depending on who your surgeon is.
Dr. Harry, going back to what you said at the very beginning of this conversation, that it is still very much a male-dominated field in regards to surgery. In that respect, did this study actually take into consideration other factors? For example, that male doctors may have been assigned to more complicated cases, or even the before care and after care of the patient with regard to the nursing or even the facilities of which the patient would be admitted to?
Yeah, that's a truly excellent question, one worthy of a scientific researcher, but you're absolutely right. And they did, and a good study will look at all of these, confounding variables and other factors. And the first thing to say, yes, indeed, surgery everywhere is a male-dominated field. Surgery has been known for being, pretty grueling, arduous, long hours, brutal training. And even in the US, female surgeons make up less than 20% of the surgical workforce. In the UK, it's even less. It's less than 10% of the surgical workforce. And that number is very slow to increase. So less women are actually going into surgical fields. I did a surgical fellowship, that lasted over 4 years in London, and I was there were 2 female trainees in a batch of mostly male surgeons. So one of the things that the studies did look at, I mean, one of them looked at complexity of cases and made allowances for all of that. And they also took into consideration and accounted for this in statistical methods. They accounted for, again, the nature of the cases. They accounted for the anesthetic doctor and their skill as well, looking for other factors that might have affected the level of the facility and did they have everything available? Did that affect outcome? They looked at nursing care, and they tried to account for all the other factors that might affect patient outcome. And in a statistical method, they eliminated those factors so that they would only focus on surgeon gender and patient outcome. So yes, the studies did indeed look at a wide range of cases, and particularly the Swedish study. And even the authors would themselves say they were surprised, I think, about the findings, because Sweden themselves is one of the most gender neutral or gender centered countries in the world. They have equal opportunities across the board, and they do have a fair amount of female surgeons, although less than the males. And they said even in such a country, they found significant differences. And that study followed patients up for 1 year post-surgery and still found differences 1 year post-surgery in their outcome. So it is something that I don't necessarily think you have to change your surgeon or anything like that. I think it's a good, building block to build on further studies, other information. Research studies don't always mean this is the final answer. It just sometimes mean we need more research. But it's worthwhile considering these things. I think it's good being a female surgeon, and I'm a gynecological surgeon, and it's good to hear that, you get recognized for a specialty that is not known to be female dominated. And for me, it is really something that I can use to encourage students and young doctors to consider a surgical field, because we feel sometimes women have to do it all. We have to have a family, and doing surgery is not maybe the best thing because of hours, and you have to have children at some point, things like that. But I think these studies just show, and it's built on previous evidence that show that the outcome is just as good, if not better, when females operate.
Does this study also suggest, because as you said, it calls for deeper analysis, but does it also, raise the questions as to whether or not personality traits and even the level of communication matters? Because there are suggestions that female surgeons may be a bit more empathetic to patients. So does that also arise following this study?
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the number one things they mentioned in their discussion, both studies, was communication, that it was felt that the female surgeons communicated more effectively and certainly spent more time with their patients and their visits. Empathy, difficult to assess and difficult to analyze, just as you said earlier. Characteristics in people are difficult to study in a scientific way. We can't actually subject everyone to a scientific study and come up with a conclusion, because there's bias in lots of studies. There's bias in everything that we do. I might have a bad day one day, and another day it might be very good. I might spend 30 minutes with a patient and then 5 minutes with someone else. It varies all the time. But communication was definitely one of the factors they used to explain the differences in patient outcome. It was thought that the female surgeons did communicate a bit more effectively. Whether that meant they were more empathetic, possibly, I don't know. I think speed had a lot to do with it. They thought that surgical operating time was longer with female surgeons. That doesn't mean they're less confident. I think sometimes just taking your time does affect patient outcome, not feeling rushed. Speed is never the key with surgery. Heroics is never the key. As I tell my students, the bottom line is always safety and nothing else. So, two interesting studies, and I mentioned them in my column because I thought, again, to encourage young doctors and, for the public to be aware of sometimes these studies are good to know if you're battling with these decisions yourself. But at the end of the day, these did make, international media that week. Further to that, there was some more studies published just a week later showing that female surgeons are actually subjected to different types of harassment and things like that. And that's something actually for another discussion. That was a pretty prominent British study that came out just days later after this one. So a lot to think about when it comes to surgery. But what you first mentioned, and the first things people think about with surgery is, do I really need it? How much is this going to cost me? What are the complications? What could go wrong? But thinking about the gender of your surgeon is just one of those things. I don't think it is the thing. Mm-hmm. I think most surgeons are trained, are competent. I think knowing the training and the background of your doctor, not just your surgeon, and them having recognized, international qualifications, all these are really important. And feel free as a patient to ask your surgeon, what is your complication rate like? What are your numbers like? Good surgeons and should really be able to tell a patient all these things without feeling, insecure and things like that. So,
now, Dr. Harry, just to shift for a moment in regards to the findings from this study, did it also have any conclusions in regards to the association between male and female surgeons and the outcome of death following a procedure?
Yes, so they did look at not just complications like heart attacks, strokes, infections, damage to other things in the body. They did look at post-op death, and post-op deaths, even up to 1 year post-surgery, were higher in the male surgeon group, higher by almost 25%. That's a pretty high number. Again, how to explain that is really difficult. The complication rate overall was higher in the male group. But yes, having a post-surgical death is something that, even when you account for all the risk factors, somebody who has chronic disease, lots of previous surgery, the difficulty of the case, it still was higher in the male surgeon group. Again, that is, all of this just means further research is needed, further analysis. Good to have big studies with big numbers. Once you publish in a journal like this, it's pretty recognized, well-conducted study. But would be interesting to do our own studies, in the Caribbean, get enough numbers, do things like this. Research usually, the conclusion for research usually means just more research before you could, definitely have a final answer for the general public.
So, Dr. Harry, as we conclude, and again, thank you so much for your time this morning. Given the findings of this study and how you've explained that women, historically speaking, have been underrepresented in surgical fields, and even the gender differences in regards to medicine between men and women, is there a need for a Caribbean-based study, a Caribbean approach on this particular issue? I mean, it could be on other medical issues, obviously, but if we were speaking about gender differences or gender biases within the field of medicine, is there one that needs to be Caribbean-centered and focused?
I'd certainly agree with that. I mean, just going into medical school now, more women are actually going to do medicine, but so few are getting to the surgical fields. General surgery, vascular surgery, even gynecological surgery like oncology, which is what I do. So few women find this field attractive for various reasons. But yes, certainly, I would advocate for national study, but definitely regional study. We may not get the numbers and the robustness that we need from just doing it here, but if we did, the majority of the islands in the Caribbean, and our graduates tend to be University of the West Indies, and see what are the differences like, any gender differences, account for other variables, I think that would be very interesting. And I hope, my final words are to encourage women to think about these fields. Don't rule it out completely. And these just show, female surgeons are doing well. And I certainly support further research in this field.
Dr. Harry, thank you once more for joining me on the program. It certainly is a pleasure, and looking forward to reading what you have in store for us next. There's another conversation, as you mentioned, in regards to the discrimination faced by women within the field of medicine. But thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you very much for having me, and everyone have a lovely day.
Do have a good day, Dr. Harry. Dr. Vanessa Harry, consultant gynecological oncologist, joining me on AM Prime this morning. The study suggesting, well, given the statistics that the adverse post-operative events, inclusive of deaths and even hospital stays, are actually affected by whether or not your surgeon is male or female. But as Dr. Harry mentioned, it doesn't mean that male surgeons are bad, but there is a need for further analysis and deeper studies to be conducted. Ladies and gentlemen, we take a break here on AM Prime, and when we return, well, Tobago Carnival, that's the next major event in our calendar of events, and there has been a shift from Crown Point to major carnival activities being centralized to Scarborough. Well, we'll expand on that after this.
Here is the WESN News on the Hour. I am Sarah Ali. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. MV Cabo Star completes repairs, awaits certification for resumption of operations. Education Minister urges media to shift focus to student achievement amidst ongoing challenges. Police Welfare Association urges vigilance among officers following the tragic murder of an SRP. And internationally, Australian man fined for taking his pet snake surfing. Now for the detail. The Port Authority has announced the successful completion of repair works on the MV Cabo Star, which recently experienced a fire incident. The vessel, now in the final stages of readiness, is pending inspection by the Classification Society. RENA, scheduled for Monday. The outcome of this inspection will determine the vessel's certification for space operations, after which it is expected to return to its regular schedule. The fire incident occurred on Wednesday, August 23rd at approximately 11:23 p.m., shortly after the MV Cabo Star had departed from the port of Scarborough, Tobago. Quick response and effective action by the crew members led to the isolation and subsequent extinguishing of the fire. Fortunately, no injuries were reported among the passengers and crew on board during the incident. With the impending inspection by RENA, stakeholders and passengers eagerly await the vessel's certification for safe operations. The Minister of Education, Dr. Nayan Gasmudoli, has called upon the media to redirect its attention towards what she characterizes as more profound and critical aspects, particularly student achievement. This appeal comes in light of concerns that media coverage primarily centers around issues related to failing school infrastructure and incidents of indiscipline and fights within the schools. Dr. Gasbidoli made these remarks during the launch of Edu Talks, a talk forum initiated by the Ministry of Education aimed at facilitating discussions with various stakeholders within the education system. His statements, however, comes just a day after a distressing incident involving 4 students from Arangwe's North Secondary. Gideon Dixon, the head of the Police Welfare Association, issued a poignant advisory today to members of the police service, emphasizing the need for vigilance both while conducting their duties and during their off-duty hours. This cautionary message follows the tragic murder of a fellow officer, Special Reserve Police Officer Charles Kubal Singh. Kubal Singh, who was on extended leave at the time of the incident, was fatally shot in the chest with a 12-gauge shotgun less than 3 minutes after leaving his home on Saturday night. The 56-year-old officer had requested leave from his police duties after he became a crucial witness in an ongoing murder case in which one of his former superiors was charged. The Police Welfare Association's president, in an interview, said this tragedy serves as a reminder of the need for heightened security measures and awareness among officers, both on and off duty. Internationally, a Gold Coast man who filmed himself taking his pet snake for a surf has been fined by Australian wildlife authorities. Eagle and his Bradley carpet python Shiva became local celebrities earlier this month after a video of them catching waves went viral. But their short-lived fame also tipped off wildlife protection officers. They say the man endangered Shiva and breached his permit to keep the snake by taking her out in public. Queensland's Department of Environment and Science says it began investigating the surfing duo after Mr. Eagle appeared in local media and this week issued him a fine of $2,322. Wildlife Officer Jonathan McDonald said in his statement, taking native pets out in public can cause them unnecessary stress and can make them behave in an unpredictable way. Well, that's news to the L1 WESN. I'm Sarah Ali. Thanks for watching.
We exposed 5 strangers to KFC's delicious chicken to see if any time could be KFC time. And at the first bite, the party began. We repeated the experiment during the day, during business hours, on weekends, with sunshine, with rain. And it's confirmed. KFC's flavor makes anytime KFC time. KFC, it's finger licking good.
Tobago Carnival 2023 is fast approaching, and the calendar of events were actually released last week Monday via a social media post. Now, whilst we're all looking forward to that, the lessons from last year's carnival hopefully have been learnt to the extent that it's reimagined and thought of to where it's implemented for the events this year. And one of the lessons is that Crown Point actually wasn't the ideal location for Juve events or any other major activities. And there are suggestions that it needs to be moved to Scarborough. Whether or not that has been implemented as yet, I suppose we'll find out now, as I'm joined by the interim president of the Tobago October Carnival Association, Mr. Dexter Sandy. Good morning, sir, and welcome to the program.
Good morning to you and your viewers.
Mr. Sandy, just please brief us on the organization that is the Tobago October Carnival Association. How was this formed, and precisely what is its operating procedures? Like, what is it supposed to do?
All right, so the Tobago October Carnival Association, known as TOCA, was formed by mass band leaders out of the Tobago October Carnival experience. So last year being the first year, the bands, we produced our costumes, we came on the road, we had our road experience. And coming into the second year, we thought it wise that band leaders should pull together as a team. Let's kind of brainstorm on what we want the product to look like for 2023. And let's present our cases to the Tobago House of Assembly to see if we can meet on a common ground. There were some pros and cons from last year, and we really learned from it, and we really want to improve on the carnival product. Mm-hmm. So that's why TOCA would have been formed.
But how is this different to the existing band leaders organization?
All right, so there's an existing band leaders organization that has been active primarily for the National Carnival, which occurs, as you know, in February. But there were specific bands that were formed last year, new to mass, and I think it's a different ideology in terms of our thoughts and from the other organization. And we saw it fit to just come together as a group focused on the bands that participate in October.
Now, one of the things that has been mentioned is a shift of all major activities to the capital of Scarborough, that be centralized in Scarborough. You have suggested that the majority of your association, that membership, were in agreement. Why is that the case?
All right, so the Tobago House of Assembly recommended a shift, and this shift was after they did a study, a series of consultations, and they had some consultants on board. And at the end of it, it was identified that Scarborough really represents the better area to host festivities of this nature in terms of the size, the square footage of the space in Scarborough, which also allows for different entry and exit points, adequate parking. So when a masquerader is finished with Juve or even playing mass on the road, they're able to get back to their vehicles quite safely in a short distance. Crown Point had some challenges based on the volume of people down there last year, so the recommendation came out for Scarborough this year. Toka, we supported the recommendation, but as we've seen recently in the news, the Crown Point Association, they have been pushing to have some level of Juve activity down at Crown Point for this year. You know, I know they are in dialogue with the Tobago House of Assembly on that matter, and from a Toka's perspective, we wish them all the best with it, because the Crown Point Association has been putting on mass for over 10 years, and I know that they will see the viability in doing it. I believe even with a split, you know, it may help balance out what actually happened down there last year so that there isn't a repeat. All right, but that is a conversation between the Crown Point Association and the powers that be. So we're all Scarborough.
So there are advantages to events, well, major events being centralized to Scarborough. I mean, yes, the entry and exit points and perhaps even the parking facilities, but Scarborough is a hilly area, and apart from that, the streets aren't that wide. Has that been taken into consideration?
So this discussion so far have suggested yes. We have a meeting today with the Trinidad Tobago Police Service, the ACP for Tobago Division. I believe this topic will be brought up this afternoon. And yes, the streets in Scarborough are wider. Scarborough has a different ambience in terms of you're playing mass along the waterfront. You know, that's something very special, and Tobago needs to value that. So Tobago has its, Scarborough, has its advantages, and we're just waiting to see how things would roll out.
Is this also allow for an extension of the carnival route, as was something that came out of last year's events?
Yes, so definitely last year's route actually would have been longer than what actually took place on the day. The planned route was a 5-kilometer route which went through Scarborough, it went down to Lambo and circled back into Scarborough. On the day, the bands weren't able to really go that distance. So the actual route that would have been used would have really been the circumference of Scarborough. And that worked well. So this year, Toka and its members, we've recommended to the Tobago House of Assembly, let's maintain same distance, but let's go in a different direction. Last year, we would have been along the waterfront pretty early. The bands would have been there between 12 to 3 o'clock. And in the later half of the afternoon, we were on the highway. And if you know Tobago, there's no area for spectators to be on the highway to view the mass. And a lot of spectators came out in the latter portion of the day, and they weren't seeing any mass on that waterfront stretch. So this year, we've recommended, and the Tobago House of Assembly, they agree with it, and I believe the police service has also agreed with it. We'll get a confirmation this afternoon. We want to go the reverse route, going out onto the Claudenwell Highway, the earlier portion. So in the afternoon, we'll be along the waterfront. It really lends to a view like no other carnival.
So you're suggesting that you start on the highway and from about 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, you're either in Shore Park Complex or most on the waterfront. That is the suggestion.
We'll be on the Milford Road, the old Milford Road, which spans from the Port Authority building, comes straight down to the Isle of Tobago side, down to the Coast Guard base. So let's say 4 to 6 o'clock, the majority of the contemporary bands will be in that space. But what the Tobago House of Assembly has also done, they've made sure this year they have ramped up the traditional mass characters, and they will be a part of the parade. So their plan is that the earlier portion, the traditional mass characters, will be on the road along the waterfront for the spectators. So spectators can come out very early as midday, and they will be entertained with mass for the entire day.
Mr. Sandy, I know that you said there is a meeting later on, and I guess more answers will come out of that. But in relation to the actual marketing and the strategies for the events going forward, is your association very much included and aware of what is taking place? Are you satisfied, I suppose, with all that is taking place thus far?
Well, in terms of marketing, we are generally saying that more can be done when it comes to the carnival, because we in Tobago's population is not known to be revelers in contemporary mass. We're known for the more Juve style. You see thousands come out for Juve. When it comes to that pretty mass, we're a bit conservative on that side. So a carnival of this nature really needs to bring in visitors, and we're looking at the domestic market being that of Trinidad and regional and international masqueraders. We're going to attract them to Tobago, to the special carnival that we're hosting.
Yes, Mr. Sorry, I was about to ask. Therefore, are you suggesting that there has been a great decline in masquerader participation for this year's events, at least up until this moment that we're speaking?
I think it's a bit early. Bands have been marketing. I know our TUCA members, have been marketing very heavily across social media, across print media, even on television. I've seen some bands running ads on television, and all of this is just to sensitize the public that Tobago Carnival is on. These are the offerings. I would say yes, more can be done. Outside of the bands, other stakeholders need to step up, as well as the Tobago House of Assembly. Just put out a lot more into the sensitizing and the Trinidad side of things, so that a person in Trinidad wondering, should I get to Tobago for October? They see some level of attractiveness by way of packages that have been offered, or if it is we actually have a road show in Trinidad, in Port of Spain, or we go down to Gulf City Mall, we move around the island of Trinidad and sensitize persons. So we could get probably about 3,000-4,000 people here over the carnival period.
Now, in that sense, has there been engagement with Trinidadian bands and Trinidadian band? As I said, we're one nation, Trinidad and Tobago, but Tobago is having a separate carnival. But has there been engagement among stakeholders in Tobago and stakeholders in Trinidad?
Yes, mass bands have been touching base with other influential groups out of Trinidad, entertainment groups, other mass bands, and they have been forming alliances to strengthen the product. I know of Iconic Mass, Jade Monkey teaming up with Ronnie and Caro. We have Zane Carnival. They have been working with a lot of influential groups in Trinidad as well. And a number of bands have taken up that strategy, because collaboration is the key. We can't just sit here on the island and say we have a carnival, come. We really need to team up with some persons who are in the industry already, who have established a certain market share, and show them the value in coming to Tobago and participating. So we have been actively doing that.
Now, also, bands, as you said, it's a bit too early to tell, but bands are a bit small in Tobago, and not in a disrespectful or insulting way. That's just exactly what it is. Given that circumstances, is there an area or an idea of bands having to share resources, for example, music trucks?
Yes, so that is actually on the table as we speak, we realize that yes, bands in Tobago are smaller in nature. And because the Tobago Carnival is more of an intimate setting. So you would see a band probably on the road with just under 100 masqueraders, and you would see bands on the road with just over 200 masqueraders. It really allows you, the masquerader, to come and enjoy a different experience to what you may be accustomed to in Port of Spain. It's more intimate. You are allowed, a lot more freedom on the road to revel. When it comes to resources, yes, the bands, we have agreed that we need to share resources. There's no point in seeing 20 or 30 people behind a truck and calling themselves a band. So we are seeing alliances being formed. Actually, for my personal band, Iconic Mass, we have actually teamed up with 2 other bands, right, to ensure that our road experience is enhanced. We use economies of scale when it says we have to now pay for these resources. That's the music truck, the drinks trailer, even the VV trailer, right? And we're encouraging the members to do that. We are seeing more and more members are pulling together, aligning brands, so that when we come on the road, it's a good representation of Carnival.
Mm-hmm. So, overall, you would see that positive mindset, positive mood, a lot of questions to be answered, of which you expect to, well, you hope for at least, to be answered later on today.
Yeah, we have so far, Toka has maintained a positive mindset. And that's what we're going into the Carnival with. At meetings, we would discuss with the Tobago House of Assembly what it is our expectations are, where we see shortcomings in the plans. But we are holding a positive mindset. We believe that the product Tobago October Carnival is only in its 2nd year. The product is still young, it's still forming. And we know given another 2 or 3 years, we should be a carnival experience to rival with any other international carnival. So we're maintaining that positive mindset, and we're really pushing for the best product come October.
Now, in that regard, just before we bid farewell to lessons learned from last year, we've spoken about the carnival route, even the sharing of resources, but the actual product, though, from last year till now, what could we expect different?
What we can expect differently, I would say the bands have raised the level of production. Last year being the first year, you saw a lot of bands coming out with costumes, beads and feathers. Some bands came out with just a Monday wear section, really testing the market to see if it is we're going to get the buy-in for the full costumes. I can say this year all bands have stepped up to full costumes that you will get on a Carnival Tuesday, very similar to what you get on Carnival Tuesday in Trinidad. What bands have also strived to do is keep the price point affordable. Mm-hmm. And affordable from the standpoint that we know Trinidad Carnival is coming, bands have launched, persons are paying their own costumes. But we still want to invite you to come to Tobago. So it should be affordable that you could dip into your pocket, you could travel to Tobago, find accommodation at a good rate, and still play mass. Mm-hmm. We're seeing where bands have now set up packages. When you purchase a mass costume, a pretty mass costume, it entitles you to a Juve package, right, which virtually is for free. And then you're now entitled to join the after party on the Sunday evening, right, the Sunfest after party. So you're really getting a bang for your buck. And all these events are drinks inclusive, right? You're getting your meals, you're getting your rest stop, you're getting all the attributes, or the elements rather, of what you experience in Port of Spain. You're going to get that here at a reasonable price.
Well, Mr. Stanley, thank you very much. Something clicked in my head there. Don't want to get too much into it. It's just that if this is something that we're experiencing in Port of Spain, then Tobago's product is not different, is it? But let's pause on that for another time, Mr. Stanley, because I know you have a meeting later on as well, so there will be a follow-up to this conversation and discussion. But thank you very much, sir, for your time this morning, and wishing you and your membership all the very best, and let's see what happens following this afternoon's meeting. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much.
Do have a good day. Mr. Dexter Stanley, the interim president of the Tobago October Carnival Association, TOCA. Ladies and gentlemen, as we are coming to an end of AM Prime this morning, let's just quickly get into some regional updates to share with you. First, starting with Cuba. And this, obviously, you know that the Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, at this point is in New York with the delegation over the United Nations General Assembly sitting. Well, last week, actually, there was a two-day summit that was held in Cuba for the 100 countries known as the Group of 77 and China. Yeah, so government officials from more than 100 countries have ended the two-day summit of the Group of 77 and China in Cuba. This was last week. They actually called for a shake-up of the global economic order. Among their priorities is to access science and technology to spur development, taking that collaborative into the United Nations General Assembly sitting. So let's take a look at what happened last week in Cuba.
The leaders and government representatives who gathered in Havana represent 80% of the world's population and 49% of its GDP. Without exception, they vowed to join forces to strengthen the voice and power of the Global South ahead of next week's UN General Assembly meeting.
The United Nations, the Bretton Woods system and the WTO are losing credibility. We must remain united. The giant multinationals of the technology sector possess a business model that accentuates the concentration of wealth.
The key focus of the 134 members of the G77 plus China was the world's asymmetric access to science, technology and innovation.
It is indisputable that science and technology have become key to development. We call on the Secretary General of the UN to call for a special session on this during the General Assembly next week.
Countries with access to science and technology, such as China, Singapore and India, made commitments to greater solidarity and cooperation with those who are lagging behind.
Excellencies, where there is a political will, reforming multilateralism is possible. Madam President, I'm happy to report that India has made a choice to deploy science, technology and innovation in its development policy interventions.
The delegates expressed their condolences to Morocco and to Libya. They also called for an end to the ongoing U.S. economic embargo against Cuba. There was also a call in the final document for medium and large economies to do more to bridge the digital gap. The Declaration of Havana of the Group of 77 underscored the obstacles faced by developing nations and called for the, quote, establishment of a new world economic order. Many, in fact, compared it to the Titanic, saying that we are all on the same ship and that if it sinks, everyone will perish together.
The Bretton Woods system is failing. The establishment of a new world order, even focusing on the World Trade Organization. That, ladies and gentlemen, actually speaks a lot about the current economic climate. The world is no longer split between just West and South. North and South. The worlds are no longer divided by that. Very much so, many countries are now taking a position that we're not in favor of following the Bretton Woods system. It's just proven itself to be inefficient and very much detrimental economic-wise. Let's move on very quickly with the time that we have left to Haiti. The Dominican Republic has closed all its borders with Haiti. This was the update given last week Friday. The countries are in dispute over the construction of a canal from a shared river. The Dominican government says Haiti's project violates a 1929 treaty and must be halted immediately. The Dominican Republic has closed its border with Haiti following tensions. Let's take a look at this report.
It's all about this, a canal that Haitian farmers are digging to divert the Massacre River, which runs along the border with the Dominican Republic. The farmers say they're desperate.
We need this water for our crops. We won't be pressured out of it by anyone. It's life or death.
But the Dominican Republic is not happy. Officials said the canal goes against a treaty signed more than 90 years ago, prohibiting each country from altering the course of the river. Early Friday morning, the Dominican president took the rare step of closing the border by land, sea and air until there's a resolution over the canal.
The border will be closed for as long as is necessary. The Army, Navy and Air Force are ready to fulfill this order. Meanwhile, we are still in talks with the Haitian government.
The Haitian government released a statement saying that it could decide on the exploitation of its natural resources and had complete right to access the river. But the border closure will hit both countries hard, especially Haiti. It's by far the poorest of the two. More than half the population is at risk of starving, according to the United Nations, and many people depend on cross-border trade. More than 25% of Haiti's recorded imports come from the Dominican Republic.
Bad. It's bad for us. The problem we have is that we don't know why. Why are things like this?
Meanwhile, those who are digging the canal are defiant. On Thursday, they launched an impromptu protest of their own. They say that there are already 11 canals on the Dominican side.
They don't respect us, and they take us as vandals. But the river is for the two of us, 50% for them and 50% for us.
We are defending our environment, we are defending our territory, and the population needs our help to build the canal.
And brick by brick, despite the border closure, they're carrying on. John Holman, Al Jazeera. By land, by air. Troops have been arriving in large numbers to reinforce the Dominican Republic's border since the country closed it to Haiti. These neighbours who share an island have always had a tense relationship, but now the Dominican Republic has taken it to the next level. It's because of this, a canal that Haitian farmers are digging into the Massacre River, which the two countries share. They say they need it to irrigate their drought-hit lands. The project's become a source of local pride.
It's a wonderful initiative. I'm here as a stoneworker. The situation of our country is critical, so we have to put our hands to work to get the canal done so that our country has food.
But the Dominican president isn't happy. He says it diverts the river from Dominican lands and that he won't open the border till they stop digging. With the standoff, many Haitian migrants in the Dominican Republic say they're facing hostilities. Many are going back home. This is a queue at the Dajabon border crossing where Dominican officials are allowing them to cross back into Haiti. Romana Charlie told us that Dominican police and immigration officers kicked her and her 4 children out of her living space in the middle of the night 3 times this week.
They grabbed us while we were sleeping and threw us out with our clothes and everything. If they had done it professionally, no problem. But they hit us and threw around the boys.
She's leaving after she says more than 20 years in the Dominican Republic. Meanwhile, trade between the countries has also stopped. That's a big problem for Haiti. More than half the country is in danger of starvation. A quarter of its imports come from the Dominican Republic. It needs the border open. This won't just hurt Haiti. The Dominican Republic depends on trade with its neighbour too. Last year it sent $1 billion worth of exports across the border. Usually this area would be bustling with Haitians coming to buy. Now these shops are all shut. The Dominican government's promised to buy up any perishable goods its merchants can't sell. But this standoff doesn't look to end anytime soon, especially since the Haitian farmers continue to dig.
Well, that's an update as to what's taking place in Haiti. That dispute between Haiti and the Dominican Republic over shared canal. Such resources, according to Haiti, they have every right to exploit their natural resources, but that 1929 treaty certainly is going to be most interesting. And how is the closure of the border going to affect Haiti? Well, clearly, as by that report, it will certainly have a detrimental effect, more so on them in terms of economic trade and the reliance of such goods from the Dominican Republic. So that's where we actually know and what's taking place. That's where we stand at this point. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me on AM Prime. It's always a pleasure. I'm Keaton Shaw, wishing you a great day ahead, a productive one and a safe one. And should it go well, we certainly hope it does, we'll see you again tomorrow morning for more AM Prime on WESN Content Capital. Have a great one.
WESN.
I am Rondell Donowa, and you are watching WESN, the content capital.
Bill and Ruth fell in love with the Benjamin Moore color Dry Sage, but they tried to match it using another brand's paint.
I mean, it's close enough.
Almost identical, really. Yeah, there it is.
Never trust another paint to be a Benjamin Moore color.
Let the home store turn your house into a home you love. Get everything you need to give your home that special look and feel. We offer household items, lawn and garden, paint center, hardware, plumbing, lighting and electrical, toys and storage solutions. 5 convenient locations: 6th Avenue Barataria, The Falls at West Mall, Pennywise Plaza Shoguanas, C3 Center Branch and C3 San Fernando. Check out our Facebook page for more information and come visit us today. The Home Store. Turn your house into a home you love.
You gave us the inspiration to be first. We gave you the solutions that put you first. You walked with us side by side, and we continued to serve you with pride. First Citizens celebrates with you 30 years of achieving dreams, shaping success stories, and painting brighter futures together. And together, we'll accomplish so much more. First Citizens, together, 30 and beyond.
From Maracas Bay to Arafita Avenue and Piaco, Richard's Bake and Shark brings the world's most popular fish sandwich closer to you. Open daily at all our locations.
Is it politics? What is it? Is it that nobody cares about sports?
The kind of support that sport used to get in the past is no longer here.
The thing is, taking a knee doesn't mean that that's the only thing you do in R&B.
Right.
Taking a knee along with other stuff.
Samantha, what are you looking forward to when you return home to Trinidad and Tobago after winning the title?
Thank you very much for speaking it into existence.
Is there no pressure on Nicholas Ball?
It makes me more motivated to work hard and to go out there and rep the red, white and black.
Why are we sending a team to the Winter Olympics?
There are a number of Trinbagonians who are in the diaspora and have grown up in winter sport. It's an opportunity that the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee will not close the door on.
I also believe in the players that we have. Once you can motivate the players, you can get the best out of them.
On the next episode of Nicole Larson Live, living in victory every day.
Destined, innovative, virtuous, anointed. Yes. I love it. That's how I think. That's how I think God actually sees you, and even your gifts.
I'm still in psychotherapy, you know, over his loss and trying to restructure my life and to live again because I have that desire and I think that's what God wants because this is what he told me. It's time to stop grieving and to move on and to enjoy the life that he's given to me. You know, he's not finished with me yet.
To say now that you're coming full circle and God is like he's saying, listen, I'm affirming you. I'm bringing you back to your homeland just to let you know how loved you are. And he's using us to let you know that he loves you.
I was able to step out with encouragement and, you know, go to like Antique or go to Scouting for Talent. And those are the places that open doors for me.
Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus.
encore of Nicole Lawson Live, Living in Victory every day. Every Sunday at 8 p.m. and Wednesday at 4:30 p.m. on WESN.
My name is Carl Media, and I'm the founder and the host of Ever Increasing Voice Ministries. Join me every Saturday and Sunday on WESN, this powerful station, at 9 a.m. on Saturdays, 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. nightly. Also on Sundays, I'll be on at 7 a.m., 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. at night time. When you come here, we are getting people heavenly ready.
We are WESN, the premier platform for Caribbean content. WESN, covering West, East, South, and North. WESN, we entertainment, sports, and news. WESN, available on Greendot 7, Amplia 118, Airlink 17, Bmobile 107, Digicel 21, ICNTT 105, and Flow 110. Connect with us at WESNCC or stream online at www.wesncc.com. WESN, your premier platform for Caribbean content.
In terms of damage and material value.
Ukraine's Air Force said Russia had launched a total of 30 drones and 1 ballistic missile on Ukraine overnight, and that 27 of the drones had been shot down. The southern city of Kherson was also hit, killing a policeman and wounding 2 civilians on a trolley bus.
Ukraine launched its counteroffensive against Russia 5 months ago, but is only now seeing some small victories. The Ukrainian army has recaptured 2 eastern villages and also made some breakthroughs in the south. Well, to talk a bit more about the counteroffensive, let's bring in Peter Zalmayev, the director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative and a military expert, joining me live from Kyiv. Peter, thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us. What are your thoughts here on this Ukrainian counteroffensive? There have been some small victories, but just the first in 5 months. Would you say it's been a failure or a success?
Well, at this point, I would say with a guarded sense of optimism that the Ukraine is maintaining its initiative in this counteroffensive. It's been obviously much slower than some had hoped for, but then what do you expect for any sort of military action without dominance in the air, which Ukraine has lacked from the get-go, and it's engaged in talks with Western allies about the provision of F-16s, but when will they arrive is another question. So given what Ukraine has been able to get from Western allies, given that Ukraine has suffered high rates of attrition, maybe not as high as the Russian side, but then Russia has many more soldiers and a much larger population, as you know, that all things considered, Ukraine has, I think, performed quite remarkably, considering that it's been able to strike at targets deep inside the Crimea. It took out 2 very important air defense systems, very costly air defense systems by the Russians there. And so I think I would say guardedly that the initiative is still on Ukraine's side.
Today in Germany, Peter, representatives from dozens of countries that back Kyiv are meeting at the Ramstein Air Base to talk about more aid for Ukraine. What does Ukraine need exactly now to win this war?
We are hearing good signals from Washington on the eve of Zelensky's meeting with President Biden. Austin, the Secretary of Defense, has announced that finally the Abrams tank will be coming to Ukraine. And we're very, very hopeful that after that meeting, Biden will announce the provision of ATACMS, which is a long-range missile which will enable Ukraine to continue striking deeper into and behind Russia's front lines, not into Russia proper, which is the condition that will definitely be attached to it, but it definitely needs to make the logistical operations of the Russian much harder in order to, to finally strike at that corridor that is connecting mainland Russia with the Crimea, in effect severing the Russian army. If that is achieved, and for that Ukraine does not really need to reach the Azov Sea shore, all it has to do is reach it within 20 kilometers of it to establish essential control, and that will have been a major, major victory.
You mentioned these Abrams tanks coming from the U.S. or due to come from the U.S. in the coming days. Now, their delivery is a bit of a U-turn, as American defense officials had repeatedly said in the past that they weren't well suited for Kyiv's forces because of their complexity. What do you read into this turnaround, if and when they get delivered?
Well, I do read into it that America understands that, it lost quite a bit of time before when, Ukraine was requesting these weapons after its successful counteroffensive in Kharkiv and the capture of Kherson exactly a year ago. That's when the all sorts of armaments should have been flowing to Ukraine to capitalize on essentially the rout of the Russian forces. Instead, they got so entrenched and they mined that area so heavily that it's been very slow going. So I think America understands that it cannot repeat the same mistakes. It has to give Ukraine and will give Ukraine everything that it has short of nuclear weapons. But once again, let's not be naive about any decisive advantage any of these armaments has. We need all of it, and we need all of it in combination. And drones. Drones will also be essential in the days and weeks and months to come. We see that Russia has ratcheted up production of all sorts of weapons, including drones, and Ukraine will have to match Russia item for item in order to at least maintain parity on the battlefield.
Peter, I just want to ask you very briefly about this New York Times report this morning that said that a deadly explosion at a market in eastern Ukraine earlier this month was caused by a Ukrainian missile. How likely is it, do you think, that that could have indeed been a case of friendly fire?
Right now, the official line by Ukraine's defense ministry is that the investigation is pending, and so they have offered no comments. My position is that when things like that happen, we should have no, compunction about being honest about these things, because ultimately the responsibility of everything that's happening in this war rests with the aggressor, with Russians. So I don't think it detracts from Ukraine's righteous cause that some of these missiles stray and mistakes do happen.
Okay, Peter, thank you for that. Peter Zelmayev speaking to me live from Kyiv. Well, today we have been talking a lot about the tensions between India and Canada after Justin Trudeau accused Indian government operatives of being behind the killing of a local Sikh leader in June. France 24's Aaron Ogunkay spoke to our Stuart Norville about who he was and what this means for bilateral relations between the two countries in our press review.
Now, Singh was the outspoken leader of a movement that's pushing for an independent Sikh state. In India, he had been accused of insurrection and terrorism-related offenses as well, the Toronto Star tells us. Now, in the days before his life, he also said that he said to journalists that he feared for his life. So all of these are things that perhaps contributed to revelations that the Indian government may have been behind it. For the National Post in Canada, this will worsen already strained relations between India and Canada. The paper says that India's accusations that Canada has been tolerating the growth of the Khalistan independence movement, which seeks to create an independent state for Sikhs, is behind some of the recent deterioration in bilateral relations between the two. The piece also points out that Sikhs in Canada were actually happy to hear Justin Trudeau openly say that Indian government operatives may have been behind this assassination, because for decades, they say, it's been clear to them that India has been targeting Sikhs in Canada. Now, the Globe and Mail, to finish on this theme, says that the incident means that Canada is yet again forced to deal with the, quote, era of foreign intimidation. The first setback, the Globe and Mail says, is China retaliating for the arrest of a Huawei executive in Vancouver by jailing 2 essentially innocent Canadians. Now it says Canada is forced to recognize a new world in which foreign governments can reach out to influence, intimidate, and even coerce, if not kill, Canadians on Canadian soil. The paper says that countering that is now a really pressing national priority.
Now, Erin's got another explosive revelation for us. This is the New York Times taking a closer look at the Ukrainian missile tragedy earlier this month. It's made a surprising conclusion, though, Erin.
That's right, Stuart. This is kind of really in-depth, great reporting from the New York Times. According to the American paper, in the piece that it published today, evidence suggests that the Ukrainian military actually may have been unintentionally responsible for one of the deadliest incidents in the country since the start of the war, at least in recent months. 15 civilians were killed and 30 of them were injured when a missile hit the market in Konstantinivka. A detailed analysis, which there's kind of some video footage on the New York Times' website, this kind of sums up the detailed analysis that they did, which suggests that a Ukrainian missile fired by a Buck launch system actually failed to hit its intended target and instead landed in that busy street where the market was. Basically, the Times looked at a combination of missile fragments, satellite imagery, witness accounts, and social media posts in order to reach that conclusion. Now, of course, the New York Times is not claiming that this missile strike was intentional. Rather, they say that it was a tragic mishap based on knowledge that such missiles can go off, of course, for a number of reasons based on malfunctioning. Kyiv has said that it's now investigating the incident.
Finally, Erin's got a very nice story. Did enjoy this when we spoke about it a little earlier. This is exploring whether or not theft can be art.
Well, Danish paper Jens Hanning had been meant to embed 500,000 Danish kroner banknotes, which is about the equivalent to 67,000 euros, from the Kunsten Museum in Denmark into a framed canvas for a statement on working conditions and on pay. But in a piece that he called Take the Money and Run, he instead decided to pocket the cash and hand over 2 empty white canvases that look like that. And he even admitted it, telling local media, quote, the work is that I have taken their money. A legal battle obviously ensued, Stuart, even though the museum's director himself actually admitted that he did laugh out loud when he saw the piece. The artist was nonetheless ordered to pay the museum back. But he did highlight that it's now made more money. The museum has now made more money than it had initially paid him for the originally commissioned work because of all of the publicity surrounding the stunt. So I almost feel, Stuart, that it's a pretty clever commentary on some of the excesses of contemporary art.
Oh, I have to say, I think he should be allowed to keep them. I mean,
Agreed.
That's quite a lot of money he's probably made for the gallery.
Definitely a gutsy move.
Exactly. Well done. Very good idea from him.
That's Erin Ogunkay speaking to my colleague Stuart Norville earlier today. Well, we're going to focus now on microfinance, the loaning of small amounts of money to help people start their own businesses. When it was first invented, it was meant to herald a financial revolution for some of the world's poorest communities, with a focus on empowering women in particular. But almost 50 years after it was first introduced in India, thousands of women now find themselves in spiraling debt. Leah Delfoli, Camille Poulin, and Kansa Junet report.
In the state of Maharashtra, central India, lies the village of Natala. This is where Sindhu, a farm worker, lives. During the planting season, she works in the field for a wage of just €2 a day. For the rest of the year, she earns no income at all. There's only one way for these daily wage laborers to survive these months of forced unemployment, and that is by taking loans.
In this season, we don't get work. What are we supposed to do? We have to pay for food, medical expenses. How can we cover that if there's no work? I take the loans they give me. I have stomachs to fill.
These microfinance companies have provided women with such loans for the past 10 years. These loans are exclusively limited to females. This is a blessing for Sindhu, as she would have never been able to secure a loan from a conventional bank. The aim of such credit is to enable women to invest and lift themselves out of poverty. But for the past 10 years, Sindhu has used these loans to pay for her daily expenses. And now, there's no way out of this debt spiral.
I've taken new loans to repay the previous ones. I've fallen into this trap, but I'm trying to tell the women of the village to not do the same. I tell them, don't take the loans, or you'll go through this hell like me.
Like Sindhu, in Natala, almost all the women are in debt. Most have taken various loans from different banks. As a result, almost every day a new creditor comes to the village to collect payments. Every time, some woman goes missing.
By what time will you send the money?
I will call you when I have the money.
I told you to send it last week, and I told you to come to the meeting.